It's kind of funny how we treat the whole concept of the future. I mean, in pop culture, it's always either uh, a crystal ball or some dystopia with flying cars.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
It's always very dramatic.
Exactly. But if you walk into the boardroom of a Fortune 500 company or, say, a high-level government agency, the future isn't a sci-fi plot. It's literally a line item in their budget. It's a structured, very rigorous discipline.
Absolutely. We tend to think of the future as this misty, unknowable void that just sort of happens to us. But serious organizations, whether that's the military, intelligence agencies, or massive consumer brands, they don't have the luxury of just waiting to see what happens. They hire people specifically to map it out.
And that is exactly who we're talking about today. We're doing a deep dive into the work and, really, the mind of Andy Hines. He is a major heavyweight in this field, a prominent American futurist, author, academic. And what I really love about his profile is that he isn't just sitting in an ivory tower somewhere.
No, not at all.
He spent years in the corporate trenches before moving to the University of Houston to actually teach the next generation how to do this.
That blend of theory and practice is what makes Hines such a compelling figure for this deep dive. We have a massive stack of source material today, ranging from his early work in the mid-90s on the future of nanotechnology, all the way up to his 2025 publications on life after capitalism.
It's a huge span. And we have a clear mission for our deep dive today. We aren't just going to list his bibliography. We're going to unpack the actual toolkit of a professional futurist. Like, how do they actually think? What is the methodology? And then we're going to apply that thinking to some of Hines's most provocative ideas regarding the future of work and the potential evolution of the economic systems that we just take for granted.
It's a really fascinating trajectory to follow.
Yeah.
But to understand his big theories later on, you really have to understand where he started. Because he didn't start out writing academic manifestos. He started by trying to sell these ideas to corporate executives.
Right. Let's talk about his time as an organizational futurist. I think this distinction is really important because usually when we hear the word futurist, we think of an outside consultant.
Yes, exactly.
Someone who flies in, gives a dazzling keynote about AI, scares everyone a little bit, and then just flies out.
Right. That's what Hines calls the sage on the stage model.
Mm-hmm.
But he actually spent over a decade as an internal futurist. He was the senior manager of global trends at the Kellogg Company and later a senior ideation leader at the Dow Chemical Company. Plus, he did plenty of consulting with his firm Hinesight and places like Coates and Jarrett and Social Technologies.
Which, being the futurist for a cereal company sounds like a funny, almost cushy gig until you actually think about the mechanics of it. He wrote about this extensively. Being an insider is entirely different from being a consultant because...
Because you don't get to leave.
Exactly. You have to live with the consequences of your predictions.
And you have to deal with what Hines famously calls the corporate antibody reaction.
I love that metaphor. The idea that a corporation has an immune system designed to attack anything that looks like a virus, even if that quote-unquote virus is actually a desperately needed innovation.
Precisely. Because organizations are optimized for the present. They're built to execute their current business model as efficiently as possible. So when an organizational futurist like Hines walks in and says, hey, in 10 years, nobody is going to want to eat high-sugar processed grains for breakfast, the corporate immune system just flares up.
It rejects the insight because it threatens the current revenue stream.
Right. It's seen as a distraction or a threat.
I can only imagine those meetings at Kellogg. It's funny to picture the future of cornflakes, but when you're dealing with a company of that massive scale, steering the ship takes years. If you miss a shift in consumer values, like the huge move toward protein or low-carb diets, you lose market share that you might never get back.
Those are the stakes. And at Dow Chemical, the timelines are even longer. If you are developing a new chemical solution or a new material, that is a 10-year R&D cycle at minimum. You absolutely cannot react to trends. You have to anticipate them.
You have to be there before the market is.
Exactly. And Hines built his reputation not by making wild guesses, but by creating frameworks that allowed these rigid, heavy companies to see around corners without panicking.
So he masters this corporate game, but then he pivots. He moves to academia, specifically the University of Houston, where he's now the head of graduate studies in Foresight.
And this is where he really formalizes his methodology. At Houston, alongside Peter Bishop, he helped codify what they call framework foresight. It's essentially exploring futures the Houston way.
Let's break this down for everyone because I think a lot of people assume foresight is just having good intuition. But in the Houston program, it's a science. It's a teachable competency.
It absolutely is. They actually won the most significant Futures Work Award back in 2014 from the Association of Professional Futurists for their book, Teaching About the Future. He also co-authored Thinking About the Future. The methodology isn't just sitting in a room and brainstorming. It follows a very specific logic flow. It usually starts with framing.
Which is defining the domain, right?
Yeah.
Because you can't just say, tell me the future. You have to ask a specific question like, what is the future of public transportation over the next 20 years?
Correct. You set the boundaries. But the real engine of the process, and where Hines has done some really vital work recently, is in the scanning and futuring phases.
Okay, well, I'll talk about horizon scanning. Because looking at our sources, there is a 2018 paper on setting up a scanning system for a U.S. federal agency, and then a very recent 2024 paper involving the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
The CDC example is perfect for illustrating how this works in the real world. That paper is titled, Establishing a Strategic Foresight Learning and Action Network. Now think about the CDC. Their job is incredibly high stakes. If they miss a signal, people literally die. Hines worked with them to move beyond just monitoring known diseases to actual horizon scanning.
This is like the radar operator analogy. You aren't just looking for the storm that is already visible on the map. You are actively looking for the tiny blips on the very edge of the screen.
Exactly. But here is the challenge that futurists face. The world is incredibly noisy. There are millions of what they call weak signals.
Like weird little news stories, fringe technologies, odd social behaviors.
Right. So how do you know which one actually matters? Hines teaches a method of domain mapping. You categorize your scan using frameworks like steep social, technological, economic, environmental, political, and you look for clumping.
Clumping. I really like that term. So one weird story is just an anecdote. But if you see a weird story in tech, and a similar weird story in economics, and a similar weird story in social behavior,
then you have a trend. That is a signal worth paying attention to. For the CDC, a weak signal might not just be a new virus. It might be a slight decline in trust in public medical institutions combined with a new, unregulated method of international travel.
oh, wow.
Yeah, those separate signals clump together to create a massive vulnerability.
And once you have those signals clumped, you move to the futuring phase, right?
Yes, and this is the part that non-futurists really struggle to grasp. You do not predict the future, singular. You generate alternative futures, plural. You take those signals and you build scenarios. Scenario A is the baseline, nothing changes. Scenario B might be collapse. Scenario C could be total transformation.
So it's essentially about stress testing your strategy. You sit down and ask, does my current plan survive in scenario A? What about scenario B?
Exactly. It turns the future from this scary ghost story into a set of manageable variables. It gives the organization agency. You aren't helpless anymore, you are prepared.
That structural approach is really comforting, honestly. But I want to pivot away from the methodology and get into the actual content of his predictions, specifically regarding us, the consumers, the people. Because one of Hines's core arguments, going all the way back to his 2011 book Consumer Shift, is that we focus way too much on technology and not nearly enough on values.
This is a critical distinction in all of Hines' work. He argues that while technology obviously accelerates change, it is the inner world of the consumer that actually dictates the direction of the future.
The inner world, so the software running in our heads, essentially.
Yes, in his 2013 article, Shifting Values, he really tracks the migration of mass consciousness. For a long time, the dominant value set in the West was materialism or acquisition. Success meant owning things. He with the most toys wins.
The whole greed is good era of the 80s and 90s.
Correct. But Hines' horizon scanning identified a massive shift toward what he calls post-materialism. And this isn't just some passing hipster phase. It is a structural change in what populations actually value. People started valuing experience, authenticity, and well-being over raw accumulation.
You see that everywhere now, the whole experience economy. People are paying for international travel instead of buying luxury cars. Or the focus on mental health and work-life balance over just blindly climbing the corporate ladder.
Exactly. And Hines' point to his corporate clients is very blunt. If you are building a strategy based on selling status symbols to a population that no longer values status symbols, you're going to fail. It doesn't matter how good your technology is. If the values do not align, your market just evaporates.
Which brings us to the biggest, probably the most provocative topic in his recent work. If consumer values are actively shifting away from pure accumulation and infinite growth, what does that do to the economic system that is built entirely on accumulation and infinite growth? We're talking about his deep work on the future of work and after capitalism.
This is where Hines really leverages his long-term view. He's been writing about these specific themes for decades. Back in 2000, he wrote an article called The Postmodern Shift in Jobs in the Future. In 2011, A Dozen Surprises About the Future of Work. And in 2019, Getting Ready for a Post-Work Future.
Post-work. That phrase always stops me in my tracks. It sounds like a utopia to some people and a total nightmare to others. What does he actually mean by a post-work future?
Well, he's not saying we will all just sit around doing absolutely nothing. He is analyzing the convergence of automation, artificial intelligence, and crucially, those shifting values we just talked about. If we can produce more goods and services with significantly less human labor, and if people are simultaneously valuing meaning over the constant hustle, the traditional 40-hour wage labor contract might literally be expiring.
It's the end of the 9-to-5 job as the core organizing principle of human life.
Right. And if the job goes away as the central pillar of society, then the economic system that relies on wages to drive consumption also has to fundamentally change. Which leads directly to his 2025 book, Imagining After Capitalism, and the related article, The Role of Values and Worldview in Societal Transitions.
Now, I think we need to pause here and make something very clear for you listening. We are entirely neutral on this. Hines is not acting as a political activist or a revolutionary here. He is acting as a systems analyst. We aren't endorsing the end of capitalism or arguing for it. We are just exploring how a futurist models these massive systemic shifts.
That is a vital distinction to make. Hines views capitalism not as a moral good or a moral evil, but simply as an operating system with a natural life cycle. Feudalism had a life cycle. Mercantilism had a life cycle. Industrial capitalism has a life cycle. Hines is looking at the data, the wealth inequality, the environmental limits, the shifting values, and saying, from a systems perspective, we are approaching a transition point.
The sources mention a concept he uses called guiding images. This seems to be the core of his argument for how a society actually navigates a transition like that.
Yes, and this draws heavily on the work of the mid-century sociologist Fred Pollack. The theory is fascinating. Pollack argued that the rise and fall of civilizations are always preceded by the rise and fall of their images of the future.
Wait, so if a society cannot imagine a future, it physically can't build one?
Precisely. A society that has a positive, concrete image of where it is going tends to thrive and pull itself forward. A society that lacks that image, or only sees dystopian collapse, tends to stagnate and decline. Hines argues that we are currently in a massive crisis of imagination. We know what is wrong with the current version of the system. We all see the cracks, but we completely lack a clear guiding image of what comes next.
That rings so true. I mean, think about pop culture again. It is incredibly easy to find movies about the world ending. It is really, really hard to find a movie about a world that works fundamentally better than this one.
And that is the danger of our current moment. If you can't visualize the destination, you can't steer the ship. In his 2025 work, Hines isn't just complaining about the current system. He is offering a toolkit for constructing those new guiding images. He wants us to do the hard work of designing a viable alternative.
And designing was one of the key phases of framework Foresight. Right?
Exactly. It all connects.
It's really interesting that he focuses on worldview as the main lever for this transition. It implies that the next economic system isn't going to be invented by some economist in a basement somewhere. It will emerge naturally because we change how we view the world.
Yes. If the inner world of the population shifts from competition to, say, collaboration or sustainability, the outer world institutions will eventually have no choice but to reshape themselves to match that reality. But Hines warns that the transition period, the liminal space between the old system dying and the new one being born, is inherently turbulent. That is where we are right now.
And just to underscore that this isn't just him throwing darts at a board reacting to recent news, I saw in the notes that he co-authored a book way back in 1997 titled 2025, Science and Technology Reshapes U.S. and Global Society. He also wrote about the future of nanotechnology in 1996.
Yes, he has literally been staring at the year 2025 for 30 years.
That gives him a level of credibility that is just hard to beat. He isn't reacting to the latest AI hype cycle or a sudden stock market dip. He has been tracking these exact trend lines since the days of dial-up internet.
And that deep, long-term data set is what convinces him that the massive changes we are seeing today, the total disruption of work, the fundamental questioning of economic systems, they aren't temporary blips. They are the result of decades of pressure finally breaking the surface.
It really reframes how you look at the daily news. Instead of just seeing chaos and noise, you start to see the clumping of weak signals he talks about. You can see the transition happening in real time.
And that is the ultimate goal of his entire body of work. Whether he is teaching graduate students at the University of Houston or advising federal agencies like the CDC, the goal is always to move people from being passive victims of the future to active, prepared participants in it.
So let's wrap this up and synthesize what we've covered today. We've gone from his days fighting the corporate immune system at Kellogg and Dow to developing the rigorous academic methodology of framework Foresight to applying that exact method to the biggest question of all: what comes after the world as we currently know it?
And the common thread through all of it is agency. Foresight is about realizing that the future is not fixed. It is a cone of plausibility. By scanning for signals and understanding the deep values that drive them, you can actually navigate that cone.
It effectively democratizes the future. You don't need a crystal ball. You need a scanning system, an open mind.
And a willingness to actively challenge your own deep-seated assumptions.
Very true. So here is the final thought I want to leave you with today. It draws directly from Hines' provocations on the post-work future. If he is right, and the fundamental structure of labor is dissolving, if the traditional 9-to-5 job is just a dying institution of the industrial age.
It raises a very difficult personal question.
It really does. If you take away your job title and you take away the standard economic ladder you have been trying to climb your whole life, what is left? What specific skills do you have that would be valuable in a world where constant productivity is no longer the main goal of human existence?
That is the ultimate foresight challenge, preparing your own identity for a future that values something completely different.
A little existential crisis to carry you through the week. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the mind and methodology of Andy Hines.
Always a pleasure to explore the horizon.
We'll see you in the future.